So today I thought maybe our topic can be why people fear growth, or a better way, a more Christian way of thinking about it is why people fear death. And I know those seem kind of different questions, but hold on, I'll kind of explain it, I'll unpack it a little bit. But this topic seems to be very important. It's a lifelong conversation. If you were kind of keeping up on some of the Instagram posts, we were talking about kenosis, and really kenosis is that same kind of conversation of why it's important for us to learn to grow, why it's important for us to learn to die. But I want to look at some tropes in the media that maybe you and I watch, and look at some of the characterizations of what's going on in some of the books we read, some of the movies that we watch. It's everywhere in the video games that we play, but more importantly, it's in our own selves too. But before we dive into examples, I want to dive into. I always like the warnings, right? I always like what could happen, so you and I know ahead of time what could happen to you and I, and how do we best prepare for that. And so, if we look in Second Timothy, I'm going to paraphrase it here, but I'm going to put it up on the screen for you. If we look in Second Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, Paul is talking about the church at the end of days, and he's warning that at the end of days we're going to become people that are selfish. We're going to become lovers of ourself, and really what that means is we're going to start to worship ourselves. We're going to choose to worship ourselves instead of worshiping God, and we're going to end up being people that worship things like money. We're going to worship things like knowledge, not wisdom, but knowledge. We're going to become arrogant. We're going to become prideful. I love that he includes disobedience to parents, because it really does kind of generate there. It doesn't mean that you can't ever disobey your parents. We all disobey our parents. I still disobey my parents every once in a while. I try not to as much anymore, but we're people that sin. But having an arrogant mindset, having a heart that is hardened, where you're just battling against people, it doesn't matter who it is, even if they are your parents, we become these very self-centered, egotistical people, and these are not the representations of Christ that we want on the earth, and this does not put us in a way where we continue to grow as Christians, which really means that you're going to be unprepared for what's happening. Remember, this is Paul's talking about this happening at the end of times. And just to give you kind of an idea, nothing happens overnight. And most of you are old enough to know that by now. Probably all of you are old enough to know that by now. Nothing happens overnight. It doesn't matter if you're studying for a test. It doesn't matter if you're trying to lift weights and gain muscle. It doesn't matter if you're trying to be a better runner, or you're just trying to be a musician, or even a better being a better video game player. It doesn't happen overnight. You have to do things over and over and over again, slowly building that skill set, that mind, that knowledge, and then putting that into a position that makes us more talented, more able to exercise that knowledge, more able to meet the world. But these people, these arrogant, these prideful, these self-centered, self-loving people, right? That's a progression that happens that we allow ourselves to slip into. So if that's what we can allow ourselves to slip into, we must then be on guard, constantly guarding. And this is a kind of warning for everybody, but specifically for Christians. And I want us to hold that in our mind. Now, I want to talk about people that refuse to grow, right? And the people that Paul just mentioned in Timothy, these are people that are refusing to grow. They are only caring about themselves. They see nothing valuable in the world around them. And they only pick and choose things that they think might be valuable to themselves. But you and I are called to something greater than that. And even outside of Christianity, I would hope that you would find time to find things valuable outside of the things that you're interested in, so that they might challenge you, that you might grow from that. So I've got a couple examples here. Probably one of my favorite villains of all time, Lord Voldemort, from the Harry Potter series. He is a character who's plagued by the fear of death. So much so that he has split his heart, his soul, into 7 different Horcruxes, into 7 different pieces, and he wants to live forever. And his characterization is so interesting because the person, he's like 80 years old, right? But he has never grown. He's never changed from once he was, a teenager. He has no development for other people. He doesn't care about other people. He has no love interests. He has no, overall growth as a character. An arc as a character. He is the same person in book one as he is in book seven, and every other character has had the opportunity to grow, but he doesn't. He doesn't because he fears death. He fears change. And in a villain, that can be a good villain for a cartoon or a kids movie or something. But in our lives, that means that as we don't grow and change, we become arrogant. We become prideful. We become people that love ourselves. It's that slow progression. We don't want to be like that. A couple other people. I don't know if you watched The Big Bang Theory. It was really popular for a long time, but I really liked it, and I really enjoyed the character Sheldon. But Sheldon is another character who fears death. His ultimate dream is to put his mind inside of the body of a cyborg and download his consciousness into a computer so he can live forever. And it really does kind of crystallize his character, where he is not growing as a character. He has terrible relationships with other people. He has a terrible time changing anything about his life because any change constitutes death, his fear. And that change means that he has to change, which he absolutely refuses to do. So much so that he berates and hurts the people around him, specifically like his longtime girlfriend, Amy. They are never able to grow into a relationship for years and years and years because Sheldon refuses to die to himself. He is so fearful of death, of change, and it isn't until it's kind of forced upon him that he ends up changing. And that's when you see the most out of Sheldon's growth, and it's at the very end of the series, which is really unfortunate because we get to see all of the other characters gradually grow over time, and we get to experience new things with them. But Sheldon is always this kind of one show pony. He does the same thing over and over and over again. It becomes very boring to watch on television. And those people in our lives also become very boring. I'm sure some of you are getting older in college, and I'm sure people from high school probably still that haven't changed at all. And their lives are very boring to you now. And you want change for them, but they fear change. One of my favorite stories of all time is Peter Pan, and the villain in that series is Captain Hook. And what I love is Hook himself is an adult. He has stopped aging just like everybody on that island. And we could talk about Peter in the same way we were talking about Captain Hook, but I love Hook because it's a little more apparent. Hook's big fear in the story is this crocodile that is wanting to eat him. It ate his right hand or left hand, I can't remember, and has a taste for Hook, and now he wants to eat the rest of them. But what's interesting is the crocodile ended up swallowing a clock, and Hook can always hear when the croc is coming because he can hear the ticking of the clock as he approaches. And this is great symbolism because we find that Hook is literally running from time. He's literally running from death. That is the only thing that scares him in this world. And it's so apparent in his character, it's so apparent in really every character that's on Neverland, that none of them grow. None of them are challenged. None of them mature. And even the children the children are children, and the adults on the island act like children themselves. Nobody is growing into adulthood on this island, but I don't think it's any better present than Hook, running literally from time. And each and every one of us is challenged by time, and we can either choose to run from it or we can face it. And something in us will change, and all change is death. Some part of us will die, but from death there will be new life. We get to grow, we get to change. A couple more. Jack Sparrow, another great pirate. I love his characterizations. All of those movies are on Disney Plus right now, and I've watched all of them recently. And it's hard to watch because his character never changes. He literally fears death. It's the one thing in all of those films that he is scared of the most. And there's this really touching moment in the third film, after Jack has narrowly escaped death dozens of times in these films. He ends up finding a moment with his father, and he's about to escape death once more, and he turns to his dad and says, "That's what it's about, right, Dad? It's about, it's about living another day. It's about moving forward." And his dad stops and has this really kind of somber conversation with him, and he tells him, "It's not about living forever, Jackie. It's about living with yourself." And it's so apparent in our lives, right? It means that we have to struggle through things. Living with yourself means you have to face yourself and the parts of you that you don't like, changing them. That's a form of death, that we cut that bad part out of ourselves and we change that. We have new opportunity to grow. Last one, I'll be done. There's an anime. I'm not sure if you all are into anime, but there's an anime called Full Metal Alchemist, and I really enjoyed the very first one. But there's a character named Dante, who is a person that jumps from body to body to body, kind of like Orochimaru from Naruto as well. They fear death, and their characterizations never change. We're looking at villains. So many of these villains are just one-track note people, and she jumps from body to body to body trying to escape death, and she never learns her lesson. She never grows, and when the main characters come to battle her and defeat her, the characters, the heroes of the journey, have been on this multi-year journey, and they've been cutting out parts of themselves and growing through that. And along the way, they've been growing as people. They've been growing in knowledge and strength and removing all the bad parts. So now that they're ready, they can face the villain and win. But the villain has never changed. And they might have been strong in the beginning, but in comparison to the hero's journey, they are now weak because they've never changed. They've never grown. And I think this is the big fear that so many of us fear in our own lives in one way or another. I want to look at one more verse, and we'll be done. And I want to talk about it with you. It comes from the book of Galatians. It's probably one of the most important verses in my life. It's chapter 2, verse 20. And it ends up saying this. I'm going to read. I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loves me and gave himself over for me. And what Galatians is telling us is that a part of us has already died. That old person, that old spirit has already died in you and I. And Christ now lives in us. And we've started that process of change. We've faced death, and we've asked Christ to be in our hearts. And he's the one that continues to give us new life. But it's up to us living in this flesh to daily continue to die to the fleshy business of who we are, those imperfections, and to continue to grow like Christ. And from inwardly, we grow and we change. So I want to talk to you guys. Think about it in a practical sense. How can we grow? How can we change? Where do you see people that fear change? It doesn't have to be about spirituality. It could be about anything. Because I see people politically have a fear of change. I see people, adventurous. They have a fear of doing something. And it doesn't even have to be something dangerous. It could just be anything. But there are lots of fears that we put in ourselves. I shared a story on Instagram about my insecurities of singing, my insecurity of playing guitar. And I chose not to do that for so long because I fear what other people think. And it prevents me from growing. It prevents me from getting better in that. So let's talk about fear. Let's talk about death. Because where death is, there is also life. But where we reject death, there is no change. There is no life. And we then continue to die. So let's keep talking about it. I'll see you in a second.